My name is Denise. My preferred pronouns are she and her. Thank you.
Alright, thank you so much. So we're debating about the motions of this House believes that major polluter nations should open their borders to climate refugees instead of providing aid for state rebuilding. Oh, sorry. Without further ado, please use your own timer. And then if you have any preference on POI and gender pronouns, please explain if you have. And to open the debate, I call upon the Prime Minister.
Wait a second, my internet is... Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
I don't know why.
I think I cannot tell you.
Yeah, that's why. I'm currently trying to open my camera, but it's having this like blue thing wiggly around it.
Yeah, I think that's fine for you to close your camera.
Sure, never mind. Okay, I'm going to be closing my camera for this debate. My preferred pronouns is she, her. And then, if there is any POI, please do open your mic. I'll be also timing myself for this for clarifications. Okay. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Climate change is an urgent global problem, and it is indeed a reality that many people around the world are being forced to leave their homes due to the impact of climate change, such as rising of sea levels, extreme weather events, and everything else. So, under our side, we believe that under this motion, this House believes that major polluted nations should open their borders to climate refugees instead of providing aid for the state's rebuilding. We wholeheartedly support this motion as understand that opening borders to climate refugees mean that not only just opening our borders, but the government of these major polluted nations such as the United States, China, India should also provide shelter food, and all their living expenses, so that these climate refugee would be comfortable in other countries. We under our side, we also believe that it is the human response that should be given by these major polluter nations, as they are the one who essentially is making these people need to go out of their country in the first place. Understanding under our side today, we're going to be fighting about how opening our borders to climate change is a much better solution rather than aiding for the state rebuilding. For the side of opposition, we simply question why providing aid for the state rebuilding is a better way, because understand that it is a much more expensive, and it is not really it is not beneficial in the long run, comparing to opening borders to the climate change. Understand that these major polluted countries should take 100% hard action, as it is as they themselves are making these climate refugees homes being crushed. Okay. Now, today, understand that aiding for the state rebuilding is a much more expensive way rather than opening their borders. We simply side of opposition. How are you going to ensure that every single climate refugees is going to be taken care of? Now, moving on towards what we believe on side of government, we believe that taking responsibility and giving compensation towards these climate change climate refugees is important. Okay, now now moving on um moving on, understand that first, what essentially the end goal that we want is that first we want to try to stop the major pollutions that is taking action, meaning that how are we going to do this is meaning that by opening their borders, this will give in return the punishment to their major polluting nation, so that they could try to decrease the amount of examples, greenhouse gases, pollutions, trashes, etc., etc. And then secondly, under our side, we believe that if not these major polluter nations, then who else is going to be helping these climate refugees? Because understand that under today's world, these major polluter countries are just ignoring what they are doing to these other countries, and these other countries shouldn't be the one who is punished for that. Also under our side, we believe that this opening our borders is a much more efficient way rather than having this rather than aiding for state rebuilding. Understand that under our world, which is meaning that opening our borders to the climate change, these refugees would have a shelter, would have food, as stated on my context earlier. And then for aiding the state rebuilding, we simply question side of opposition, because understand that okay, in the country that they are trying to rebuild it, right, understand that that country has already affected severely, meaning that rising of water levels, meaning that there are not much space anymore, and then like how it would have it would be increase of temperature where it wouldn't be suitable to live anymore. So we simply question on how why are you trying to give this climate refugee an unlivable place to be in. Okay. Other than that, under our side, we believe that these major polluter countries should. Yes, miss.
The point is that they have left their own country because of climate crimes, such as deteriorating of like air quality, for instance. You push them to countries who already have high degrees of pollution, for instance, India and China. So, what is the benefit that these climate refugees get?
The benefit here is that it wouldn't be what is happening is that it wouldn't be as severe as what their country is trying to do, because understand that it's a global issue, as it has been stated on my first speech. Some countries such as India and China is not severely polluted or severely affected by this climate crisis, rather than this climate refugees country. So this is why we believe that it is a much more beneficial place for them to go. So this is why under our side, we believe that opening borders would be a much more efficient way. Okay. So, what have I been saying for the past few minutes, right? I have been saying to you, I have already proved to you a few that I will be stating right now, which is why it is a much more efficient way for us, for these polluter countries, major polluter nations should open their borders rather than aiding for the state rebuilding. Secondly, I've already told to you about how these providing aid for the state rebuilding is much more expensive, and in the long run would affect the pollution even more. And with all of that being said, I rest my speech. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I call upon leader of oppositions.
Hello, I hope I'm clearly audible.
Can hear you.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two things I'm going to do in my speech. First, I'll fill in the characterizations that have been missing coming from side government. Because first speech over, we don't know what are the major polluter countries, what is state rebuilding exactly, what would taking in refugees would look like. Firstly, there's a trade-off within this debate in terms of what you prioritize. At a point of time, you go ahead and like clearly prioritize taking in refugees. You don't go ahead and work for state rebuilding. what is state rebuilding in terms of like climate refugee change? We believe the state building looks like working on the core of the issue. That is, you keep carbon taxes because carbon emission was something that really messed up with like your AQI, or you have investment in building green tech and energy. In government side of the house, you disregard all of these measures and you just simply take in refugees and like give them some temporary fixation but no long-term fixation. Then characterization. Firstly, in terms of who are the major polluter nations, we believe in status quo. The major polluter nations are China, India, and to some degree United States, right? These are the major polluter nations. What does the situation within these countries look like? We believe they have a huge population already. They have high degree of unemployment, and people are pushing back the government to provide more job opportunities and like employment opportunities, etc. Right? In that scenario, I never understand insofar refugees go ahead and like take shelter within these countries, apart from some degree of like food or like shelter, will they have like a sustainable life? Will they get jobs, or will they be integrated within this society? But secondly, because there's so like a high population within these countries, the citizens of this country actively resent any like refugee coming in, because they see that if refugee come in, they will encroach upon their spaces, so there will be an active resentment from the people. This would look like probably translating into things like xenophobia on the first place. But thirdly, who are climate refugees? We believe these are people who've left their own country for reasons like heavy rainfalls, droughts, environmental degradation, high levels like sea level rise, and all of these things, right? All of these things made them leave their country because they had a traumatic association within their nation. Now, you put them in countries that are major polluters. All of these problems still exist in these major polluting countries, right? Because major polluting countries look like having high AQI, like especially like India, in terms of like having high temperature these days, extreme temperatures, simply because climate change is a pertinent problem in India. So what you do in like government's paradigm, you put them out of their own hometown where they've already suffered because of climate change, and you put them even in a worse off country who has worse of climate history and like worst of position to accommodate in the very first place. I'll come to rebuttals by the end of my speech, but two of our major pushes. Firstly, why do climate refugees leave their country? They leave their country because they look for a better and sustainable livelihood. In their own hometown, they face the first hand atrocities of climate change. They've suffered because of them, and they don't want to repeat it. They want a better livelihood. In terms of you pushing them to major polluter countries, you're literally pushing them into countries or like places of what they've escaped on the first place. Three impacts of that. Firstly, you make them revisit their trauma at a point of time, in terms of like you leaving your own hometown where you have community connections, where you're adjusted, where you probably had a job, all of these things. You leave all of these things and come to a newer country where you face the same repercussions of climate change, because like pollution, all of these things still exist within major polluter countries. So you're revisiting your trauma because the climate atrocities that pushed you out of your hometown still exist within the status quo. But secondly, in terms of your integration, note that you've been literally displaced from your hometown. In terms of you integrating back to other countries, this integration would never happen because these countries don't have the capacity to integrate you. These countries don't have the capacity to provide you with employment, education, healthcare facilities. Literally look at countries, third world like major polluter countries like India, China. Especially in India, if you look at it, that India does not have the capacity to probably provide for its own citizen. Indian citizenry is literally in the shavels of like poverty. There's like problem with education, all of these things happening. I am unsure as to how will they ever be able to provide to these refugees additionally. But before I move forward, POI. 3, 2, 1. Second thing, note you're literally moving away from the crux of the problem. In this debate, the crux of the problem is that climate change is pertinent and people are suffering because of climate change. So, how do you solve climate change? Do you solve climate change by giving a temporary fix to people and providing them with refugee? I think no. The priorities should then be on state rebuilding. These state mechanisms have failed because they never had enough money to. So, we believe major polluter countries should give money to these countries to build their green tech, to put in carbon taxes, to have like environmental friendly policies. This money is required for these countries so these countries are able to better sustain themselves. But first, before I give like impacting on this argument, note that why any positive matter on like Gov's case fail. I've already told you that in terms of like public backlash that come from refugees, it's less likely you're able to integrate. But on top of that, you're never able to solve the problem of climate change, because these major polluter countries can now just go away and like take tokenistic responsibility and be like, oh, we're taking refugee and that is enough. They would never try to work into like better their policy for like making them far more climate friendly on the very first place. But thirdly, note panel, what is the best case of side government? The best case is that these climate refugees get a space to live, provide them with basic food, shelter, all of these things, right? We believe that is bad. Because in terms of you getting this basic livelihood, we believe that that it becomes largely inexclusive. They could have gotten this basic livelihood by migrating to nearby countries or any other places, right? But second, you don't hold the major polluter countries accountable. And thirdly, in terms of giving them sustainable livelihood, you can never give them that because these countries don't have the capacity to do the same. Rebuttals then. Their idea is that, oh, like state rebuilding is extremely expensive. We tell you it is okay to make this trade off because if you do a long term analysis, insofar there's a state fixation of certain things in terms of like carbon taxes, green tech, the prices would go down, the likelihood of betterment in these countries would be high, and people would be able to reintegrate it in their own hometown, in their own countries, rather than taking refuge in other countries. So on a delta, this expense is better. But second, even if you look at the expense data, note that providing for food, shelter in and of itself is very expensive for countries like India, China, simply because they're extreme, like especially for like India, simply because they don't like have enough money to reallocate to these things. But second, their idea is that you need to take care of all of them. We believe that in terms of refugee or concerned, refuge, like taking refuge, only a few people can be reintegrated. A large part of the population remains like I have no other thing to do. But lastly, note any perfect like climate like solving strategy can only be formulated where there is equity. If you're able to help everyone at a point of time, only a few people are able to take refuge, you're missing out on a lot of chunk. You don't solve the root cause. For all these reasons, proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. I call upon Deputy Prime Minister.
Am I audible?
Yep, you are.
Alright. Give me a second. Alright, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, members of this meet, do note that what side opposition have been trying to present to us is that there is no use in sending these refugees to these major polluter nations is because what would their life be there? Would it even be better if they better than if they stayed? Or all these refugees definitely have to move to these major polluter nations. First of all, I will start off my speech with rebuttals of what the leader of opposition have said. Now, leader of opposition mentioned that this solution would just be a temporary fixation, not in a long-term fixation. Yes, it probably would be a temporary fixation, but it would at least provide these refugees with a choice that they are allowed to have a space to be living in. If staying in their original country is too much, if it's become too unbearable for them to stay there, at least they have the option of going to these of these countries, of these major polluter nations, in order to seek another life or a better living there. Now, leader of opposition also mentioned, like, will these climate refugees have a sustainable life? What about the active resentment from the locals there that they will be experiencing, and what happens next? Or what about the food that these countries already have a huge population? What about the occupation? What about the healthcare? What about their well-beings there? Do understand that the debate today is mainly focusing on whether or not these polluter countries should open their borders for these refugees to as a choice for they can come to these countries if things get unbearable due to the climate change in their original countries. Now, do understand that
what happens next is completely irrelevant. The discussion is about whether these refugees can come to these major polluter nations if they want to. If they want to, they can come. If they don't want to, they can stay. What happens next is completely irrelevant. How their life continues from that point onwards is completely irrelevant to this debate. We're just talking about whether or not these major polluter nations should open their borders. Therefore, these refugees would have a plan B in facing the climate change that is happening in their original countries due to the polluting of these major polluter countries. Okay, do note that opposition side also mentioned that these countries are already majorly polluting. They are the major polluting nations of the world. Do note that yes, they are majorly polluting, but they are not receiving the effects. Who are receiving the effects are these small islands, these coastal nations. Yes, US is contributing to a wide range of pollution, but do we see the US drowning? No, we don't. Who's drowning are these small and coastal countries such as Indonesia. They are the ones who are receiving the effects. Yes, USA, yes, China is polluting, yes, but they are not receiving the effects. They are not majorly affected by their behavior, by their polluting behavior. They are not receiving the consequences. These innocent minor islands are the ones who are receiving the consequences. Now,
Yo.
poor regions. Yes, please.
If the idea is that Indonesia like has repercussions of high sea level rise, if all of the population goes ahead and like move to America, do you think without any external help, Indonesia can survive as a nation insofar climate change still keeps happening because you don't fund it?
Which is why I mentioned that it is a choice. We're not asking, oh, let's take the whole Indonesia, let's take the whole Indonesia, let's go to America. No, it is a choice. We are providing them with a choice rather than them having no choice at all. We are saying that if things get unbearable for you, you can come to America. Come, we are opening our borders for you. Come, but we don't have to. You don't have to come. It is not forced. We're not forcing you to come. We're not forcing you out of your homes. Everybody get out now. No, we're not saying that. We're providing them with a choice if they want to come or not. And when these people who choose to go to these countries do choose to go to these countries, then that would mean less. There will be a lesser. There will be a decreasing value in the population in Indonesia, and these people. And in the meantime, they could rebuild their state. In the meantime, that their country is not overcrowded with these climate refugees. Okay, now moving on. Poor regions of the world are the most affected by this climate change. Am I right? Now, we are trying to achieve global climate justice. These major polluter countries are polluting while all these poor regions, poor countries are receiving the effects. Now, yes, the major polluter nations would be burdened with the arrival of these refugees. Yes, but if we do not open the borders, we are depriving these victims of the possibility to live a comfortable life to at these countries who are not affected by the climate change. Now, polluter countries obviously have the funds to care for these refugees. Yes, they do, because their country is fine. They're just polluting, but their country is fine. Now, do note that state rebuilding takes a long time. It takes a while. It doesn't happen in an instant, and you need time for state rebuilding. Now, understand that if the country says that, okay, we're gonna achieve this by 2040, we're gonna achieve this by 2050, we are giving them so much time to stall and just wait around while these refugees are still currently experiencing the damages, the consequences of this climate change. It's taking a long time, and what do we do with these refugees in the meantime? Where are they going to do in the meantime? We're talking about now, because state rebuilding is talking about later. Now, it is and opening the borders for these refugees is obviously teamwork between these nations. They can help each other because, well, US, you're doing the damage in the first place. Don't you think you are obligated to help now? And that would just obviously means transparency between the nations and the people. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I call upon Deputy Leader of Oppositions.
Hi, I will be starting my speech in 10 seconds, please. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, the first thing I want to highlight is the fact that the government is quarreling. There is a binary in the debate. Either you invest in relocating these people, in relocating the climate refugees, or you invest in rebuilding the state, right? So the idea that they're giving, there's a choice. We're just opening up a choice. It does not matter here because there's a binary, and they need to stick to that. All right. So the scenario, the idea that the Gov is painting is that there is problem in the country. These problems are climate related, which is being caused by major polluter countries like India, China, etc. So what they propose is that these people are picked from these places that already have major climate issues, and they transfer to another place that has similar climate issues, maybe not exactly those as the ones being experienced by from the place they've been taken off, right? But the thing is, these countries themselves suffer from a lot of climate issues. It's not like they don't have it, right? When you talk about India, air quality index is very, very poor in India. Delhi, the capital, being one of the worst affected cities. Even if you look at China itself also has a very huge problem of air pollution, and the life in these countries is already not very good. So what you're saying is what they're saying is that you live in a bad life, you live in a very, very bad area, we'll send you to a relatively bad area. So the idea so now what happens is when they relocate to these areas, they lose their connection to their homeland, they lose their emotional support that they had over there, and they're thrown into a completely foreign country that they have no relation to, and neither do they understand neither do they understand that country, nor are they accepted by these countries, right? So with this is the major push that they're giving, right? Why do we say state building is better? The major reason we believe the state building is better is because it solves the problem, right? The problem, if you just relocate them, still prevails, right? It is a very, very temporary fix because number one, only a very certain amount of refugees can be relocated. How many times are you going to relocate, and what number are you going to relocate? A very big problem with these countries is that they already have a very huge population. They cannot sustain themselves. They cannot sustain themselves. Even in India, employment is such a huge problem. Look at China is already tackling a huge population problem, and further throwing on more people in this mix will be a very terrible idea, because the government itself will face a lot of backlash for receiving these people, because the natives themselves are not getting proper employment, or nor are they getting adequate living standards. Pushing more people on them is a further burden that the natives will not appreciate, nor will they like. Moreover, since the government itself lacks the resources, how will they relocate? It's very easy for the government to say that we're just talking about the relocation, not afterwards. But when you relocate, if you're moving from one country to another, you're moving with a motive that you will get a better lifestyle. So when you go there, even your basic needs of food are not being met. At best case scenario, basic amenities, basic needs like food and housing are being met. What about employment? What about you being integrated into the society? All of that will not happen, because the natives will have a huge problem with you being there and taking in the resources. Moreover, the government itself will not be able to relocate you due to the lack of resources, in the sense they don't have land, they don't have employment opportunities, they don't have enough infrastructure to actually support um, these refugees, right? And moreover, the problem in the home country still remains. The home country is still going through these problems. The problem over there is the climate change. The effects of climate change over there still continue. There is no fix to that, right? When we talk about state rebuilding, we talk about how how the countries will invest in these countries to further build themselves again, and invest in greener technologies, in better infrastructure, so that they can not only battle the effects of climate change, but also to a certain extent reduce its effects in the first place by reducing carbon emission, nitric oxide, carbon monoxide emissions that is done by the industries, right? Moreover, if there is lack of state funding, the state of these home countries remains the same, and they keep depreciating over a period of time, thus making the resources that are over there unusable, right? Which is a very huge which will pose a huge problem, since the resources are already scarce, right? Moreover, there will be a concentration of population in these particular countries. Even when these countries accept refugees, there are already a lot of people there. As I've already talked to you about, these countries usually have higher population because right now third world countries are the major polluters, right? So they already have very limited resources that the natives themselves are vying for. And in this, when you throw in the mix of foreign of the government accepting foreign people, the refugees lose their homeland. They're forced into a space that does not welcome them due to the lack of resources, right? Moreover, even the government is put in a very bad spot because they receive a lot of backlash for letting these people in, and the administration of basic needs becomes very difficult due to the lack of resources. When they relocate on an international platform, if you're allowing refugees to come in, you are expected and you have to give them a certain lifestyle. You cannot just let them in and not care about them. You have to give them housing, food, uh, schooling, medicines, etc., which is a burden that the governments of these countries cannot undertake because of their own financial weakness. They barely have the money for their own people, and thus providing their needs is another additional burden that they cannot partake, right? Moreover, resettling is a very long and tedious process. They talk about how the government talks about how rebuilding is a very long process. Resettling and relocating refugees is also a very difficult, tedious, and long process. So it is a very inexclusive thing. Both sides take a lot of time, right? When you're resettling a person, you need to give them a home, you need to integrate them into society, you need to provide them proper employment that is sustainable throughout generations, because now these people are going to be living over here, right? So you need to ensure that these people have the infra, they have the structure so that they can be inducted into the society, and they aren't just left as outcasts, and generation by generation only looked at as refugees, right? Which is right. Moreover, the problem with the idea of relocating, or with the idea of climate refugees being accepted, is the biggest problem is that it is a temporary fix. Why? Also, the government already concedes to the idea of this being a temporary fix, right? But they say it gives them a choice. But this choice comes at what cost? They're going to a country that's barely any better than theirs, and they're losing out on a lot of things like emotional support, their homeland, their ties, their employment, a lot of things that are not only have emotional importance for them, but also tangible importance in terms of resources, right? So when there is no employment, no integration into society, how will they survive in that country without all of these things, right? So why do we believe state building is better? Because number one, we actually deal with the problem of environmental degradation. We're going into these areas, going into we're going into these countries and telling them how to deal with the problem. We're giving them money for to build infrastructure support system that will actually help them combat the problems of environment problems. Moreover, we are also reclaiming resources. Since the resources are already scarce, the resources that are in the home country will obviously go to waste if everybody starts relocating to the major polluters, right? So what we're doing is we're actually helping them reclaim these and utilize these resources better, staying in that country. With this, I come to the end of my speech. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Now I call upon Government Whip.
Okay, just to reconfirm, am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So hi, my name is Intan Irina. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I prefer POIs to be delivered verbally. So now, without further ado, let's start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate has been about a matter of two things. If you're a major polluter nations, two options are given to you. Either you open your borders towards climate refugees from other nations, or just still stay with the status quo and just state rebuild with empty promises throughout to your people. And with that in mind, let's talk about what I'm going to do in today's speech. I'm just going to give to you a lot of clarifications that has been demanded by side of opposition, and then I'm going to present to you some issues and just some clashes and rebuttals towards the debate, right? So let's talk about clarifications. Number one, understand that this debate is not about these major polluting nations giving aid and funding for the affected nations to state rebuild. No, this motion is about major pollutant nations should, one, either you open your borders to climate refugees, or two, don't do that and just focus on your nation by rebuilding your state through constitution and also like policy about like climate change and such, right? So understand that that's what this debate is about. How like, because we've seen that opposition has been confused that this is about major polluting nations giving funding towards affected nations for them to stay rebuild. However, we don't believe that that's what the motion is trying to focus on. Number two, on how we want to clarify that these major polluting nations, we're going to make sure that they open their borders and allow for these climate refugees to relocate themselves to these countries who are deemed more safe than their own home countries. Because understand that right now, just like how opposition has clarified that they characterize major polluting nations such as United States, China, and India, right? There is an option for these climate refugees. Not that we're trying to force them to relocate. We're not trying to force the government of affected nations to relocate their people towards these countries. And understand that there will be choices. If what the side opposition has been preaching on and on is talking about India only, panel, understand that right now the choice is not just India. Understand that understand that countries like China, United States have far more favorable conditions for you to live your country, to live your life, rather than your home country. Which understand that right now the home countries that we're talking about is the affected nations, such as small island countries who are actually who are like experiencing rising sea levels, and you're an island, you will drown one way or another. And then these bigger countries who have so much more land and so much more opportunities for these people should given their humanitarian rights to have like safe living conditions, right? So understand that that's what the option that we're trying to talk about. So understand that right now, why is the issue of why are we trying to say that they should work together with like these nations instead of like focusing on state rebuilding? Just like how our second speaker have talked about, is that we should promote more transparency between the government and the people. Because understand that state rebuilding, just like how United States have been doing amongst the years, that they have been like promising towards their peoples that there will be more like new policies, new law changes, like, and then like infrastructure, like better for green gas house emissions, right? But understand that right now, even in 2023, right now, as we live, we don't see that actually improving in the end of the day. So understand that right now, it's not about we're not letting them rebuild their state. Is that about why this motion exists? Is because we don't see the positive effects of that in the end of the day. So right, let's go on to the first issue in this debate. So a big thing that has been going on about between government and opposition is about the question of sustainability and consistency, right? So opposition said that like funds should be given. So even though this is not what the path that we're trying to lean on for the motion, but opposition said funds should be given, like instead of funds to like aid for these climate refugees to come into your nation, right? You should rather just give those money to like to the affected states for them to like rebuild and give an opportunity for them to grow as a nation, right? Number one, how would you ensure all these major affected nations get these aid in the first place? Because understand that right now, these major polluting nations are nations like United States, Russia, China, these big powerhouse countries in the world, right? And the ones that are affected are just small countries, like the small island countries, right? So understand that we question what's like the feasibility, or like noting that like some major polluting nations that these major polluting nations would actually give these funds in the end of the day. But understand that right now we do acknowledge the fact that in status quo there are some major polluting nations that already does that. But there are still many challenges to address this issue in the end of the day. Because when you're a small nation that is like that is experiencing like very detrimental harms towards your people because of climate change, that one is not even caused by you. Because we understand right now, major polluting nations, they pollute the earth, and then the major consequences is not actually towards their countries, it's towards these small countries. So understand that right now, even if they give like money here, there's the money, you can rebuild your state now. Countries that are affected by climate change may have like limited resources, like including like human capital and technical expertise. So understand, just by giving money, that's not enough to actually rebuild these states in the first place, right? So number two, how do you ensure they will? And then talking about like state rebuilding, right? For these major polluters to actually rebuild their state. how do you ensure that they will push for the state rebuilding in the first place? Because understand that right now the question of transparency between the government and the people should be really discussed in this debate. Because understand that throughout the years, let's talk about how government gives off like promises like by like 2030 the gas emissions would like reduce by 35%, 50%, right? So those are the only things that the people gets to know from their governance. What else about the efforts were never updated by that process? And understand that why opening the borders to climate refugees is better than state rebuilding than these empty promises, right? Number one is because when you open your borders, right, the burden, just like how we have already spoke to you in our previous speeches, that this burden should not just be felt by the government. It should also be like a teamwork between the government and the people, because the people should like accept these refugees from the other nations, right? And understand that talking about like how the deputy leader of opposition talked about how this will be like these refugees would be a burden towards these major polluting nations. Understand that we acknowledge that that's what they deserve in the first place, for polluting the earth and then affecting the other nations. And when that happens, that will act as of like a punishment or a compensation for their actions. Because understand that these burden that comes to their nation, this will be the pressure for them to actually reduce their rate of pollutions in the end of the day. And with that, I've never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I call upon opposition's whip.
Besides cakap pasal now, another thing you can say that climate change is real and there's nothing we can do about it. Anything we do is already too late, because climate change is very bad. As you can see
Hi,
how even in
I think there's
Malaysia
somebody who's
flooded,
unmuted.
like
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Cool. Hi, I am the opposition whip, and am I audible?
You are audible.
Cool. Okay, fine. Starting my speech, my pronouns is she and her, and I'll be taking POI via chat only. Please do not unmute yourself. Starting my speech. Okay, just give me 10 seconds, please. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this is how I'm going to be structuring my speech. Certain rebuttals to the opposition, to the gov whip, then comparative for you, then impact analysis for you, and then drawing a comparative, right? Now, first of all, going on certain rebuttals, like the opposition, the government whip brings to you that how major pollutants like major pollutants, other countries like China and US, they are also available and they are more accommodative with these refugees, right? Now, drawing up a comparison, because this was brought in, China has often have cases of people having Islamophobia with respect to their refugees, and there have not been giving a lot of proper aid and as well as proper resources to their refugees, right? Moreover, in US, there has been a lot of xenophobia, like my prime minister, like my leader of opposition had already beautifully characterized to you, that in most countries, xenophobia does take place, and US has been one of the major countries to actually go ahead and show this separation of refugees from their own country people, right? Because there are often people of orthodox nature who are not ready to accept these refugees, and there have been certain protests as well. So you can drop a comparative here, right? That how these refugees are not going to be safe at the end of the day in any of these major pollutant countries, because A, either the living conditions are not well enough, or B, there are a lot of pollution, or there is C, scarcity of resources, and lastly, they are already gonna, as my prime minister has already pushed up to you, that they're gonna go and revisit their own trauma, that is they left their hometown and everything, and then push back again in a polluted country, right? At the end of the day, this refugee does not seek asylum anywhere in a better way to make their quality of life better, right? That's how I take their one of their arguments, right? Second, they tell us that how do we ensure that these countries go ahead and get aid and how they utilize it into improving their own countries, and how does then this state development look like, right? We ensure that they get aid because there are a lot of international sources through how this aid receiving gets secured, right? We can go, obviously this aid then looks like money given in form to go ahead and rebuild the state. Now the state rebuilding can already be characterized by the leader of opposition, that it looks like then going ahead and co-opting into more technologies which are greenhouse effective, which are more green tech, building in green tech, or like installing stuff like installing devices which help you escape these increasing sea levels, right? There are already such technologies that do exist, whereas people do get alerted, right? Then these technologies can now be co-opted into by these smaller countries, which they were initially not able to because they do not have enough financial capital to go ahead and secure these kind of technologies. And then we give them and help them target the root cause and give them a kind of catharsis with respect to how they can now protect themselves with these atrocities of climates, and these atrocities of climates that are basically caused because of these major pollutants, right? Moreover, they talk about how these countries already have less resources, and just giving them money won't solve. Pala, we need to understand that coming in and flowing in of better resources come from then money, right? If you have enough money to go ahead and buy these resources to improve your country and the quality of life, I think then that becomes more freeing, and the catharsis then lies on getting more money with in contrast to then sending off your people to another countries, the reason especially to countries because of whom you are in this state, right? Now going ahead and talking about impact analysis, like now a likelihood of change, where this likelihood of change lies, right? Even if government goes ahead and tell you that now these refugees will have immediate relief, that they're going to run away from these countries where there is climate atrocities happening and go into countries who are major pollutants and then become refugees, we think that now becomes worse off, because the major cause, that is something that we as opposition have been pushing, that the major cause, then the root cause does not get solved here, right? The root cause is that their major country from where they are is not going to get improved, is not going to be improved, right? The climate or the disaster that they were hit with stays same. There is no improvement in that country, there is no development in their country, and then that becomes and that particular member state becomes redundant as a country because they do not have enough resources to go ahead and rebuild themselves or go ahead and have better quality of life, right? So the root cause of the formation of these refugees does not get targeted in their paradigm, whereas we bring into you a solution where this is gonna where this root cause gets targeted and the likelihood of change then happening gets secured, right? Now secondly, stakeholder analysis, where these refugees are going to be better off, right? The government brings to you that these refugees are going to go into these major pollutant countries, but then again there is going to be no integration of them in the society, because these major pollutant countries, like characterized to you by my prime minister, that how these by my leader of opposition, that why exactly they become major pollutants, because either they have a lot of population or scarce resources, right? Now these countries who do not have the capacity to go ahead and host you now are being burdened with refugees, b these refugees only get bare minimum of everything, that is food and shelter at max, and that also with no promises of integration in the society, with no promises of employment in these countries, and hence they are in longer run as well as in shorter run worse off, because the quality of life does not improve. It either degrades, or because you are at a worse off country as well, right? Whereas we an opposition side tells you that even if rebuilding is expensive, we think that in the longer term, in the longer terms, these refugees in the longer term, this country would be better off, and the need of refugees then kind of gets eliminated. Moreover, even if these refugees do not get immediate relief, in the longer run there will be positive impact and even a greater impact, like already characterized by the leader of opposition, that at the end of the day these countries get better off and a better capacity of holding them, right? Now third, where does reparation happen? Reparation from these major pollutants, right? In the government side, it becomes a very tokenistic move, that is they open their borders to these refugees with again bare minimum facilities and no improvement or whatsoever, right? Whereas in we tell you that these countries reparate by giving a large amount of aid
to these countries which are bearing the effect of their atrocity of major pollutants, right? And this aid solves the issue that is kind of caused by these major pollutants. So the reparation happens more on our side, right? Now talking about the best case, even if I take them on the best case, that is refugees get a choice as to where they wish to go, and they get a choice and immediate relief of having being refugees, we think then their world looks like these refugees not being taken care of, and then that is also inexclusive. Even if this choice does not exist, there people still accept climate refugees, right? Most European countries as well, there is UN conventions which are literally built for the help of these refugees, and then these refugees are not stranded off even if this choice does not exist. But if you draw up a comparative, if our choice of not going ahead and helping these country does not exist, there is no improvement happening, there is no targeting of the root cause, these countries then remain unhelped and on the same way like they were before. There is no improvement happening. So even if you go ahead and buy in their paradigm, we think that they just open up a opportunity which open up a choice which is not helpful at the end of the day, because the alternatives of it already exist. Whereas in our paradigm, the major solution of going ahead and having reparation, likelihood of change, and better quality of life only exists by these major pollutants giving in aid to these other countries for state rebuilding. With that, proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for thank you for your speech. Now I call upon the reply of oppositions.
I hope I'm audible.
Yep, you are.
Starting my reply in one. A very important clarification in this debate. The Gov whip goes ahead and pushes on to us to defend status quo. What is the motion about? Major polluting nations are not held accountable in any form in status quo. In their side of the house, they say that they can just open up their border and take refugees and still be held accountable. We say that they should go ahead and give state rebuilding aid. This is the binary in this debate. It's not status quo, it is a policy that should be introduced now. But second thing, their idea is that there's a choice that exists. You don't have to take in all the refugees, and that is okay because this choice is important. Note very importantly, panel, climate policies work on climate equity. This is what I've been
Are you
pushing
speaking?
Hello. Am I not audible? Am I not audible? Hello.
You are.
Uh, wait, I'll just go closer to the internet.
Medhavni, you're audible, don't worry.
So just somebody
It's only
unmute and
me, but I cannot hear.
sorry.
Hi,
Uh,
you're audible, Medhavni.
Chair, is there some network issue from your end? Can someone unmute and confirm? Is there some network issue from the chair's end?
Medhavni, you are audible.
Okay, I'm audible. I'm also audible to the chair. I want a confirmation from the chair, actually. Chair, can you give a confirmation as to
Hi, if the panel is able to hear me, Dhavani, because they have to give a reply speech, could you please confirm if they are audible to the
Excuse
panel?
me. Can anyone speaking? So just checking if my speaker has problem.
Yeah, I think it's audible for me, but it's more important that the
Oh,
chat.
I think the problem is on my end. Let me try to reconnect.
Yeah, let's just wait for the chat. I've already kept the time. It's about 40 seconds, give or take.
Can anyone say something? Dennis, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes, I
that's audible.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, I'll restart my speech. Just a second, I'll set my timer again.
Okay. Sorry for that.
No worries. Starting my reply in 3, 2, 1. Some clarification for the panel at large. What is this debate about, right? We don't believe that the binary of this debate is status quo versus like opening up your border. Why do we say that? Note that the motion states that major polluter nations need to be held accountable. In status quo, these nations are not held accountable. The binary then is them tokenistically just taking climate refugees versus them, like versus in our paradigm, there's active state funding for rebuilding. We do not support status quo. So all of their allegations with regard to, oh, no positive change is happening in status quo, it's less likely to happen anyway, falls apart simply because this does not happen in the status quo in the very first place. There's a trade-off that you have to make. But second, they go ahead and say that there's a choice that exists, right? They go ahead and say people who want to go into these countries can still go and people who don't want to might not. The problem with this idea then is even if there is like a choice, note that climate policies work on climate equity. That is the crux of climate policy. You don't want just privileged people who are able to go out of their country to be able to access this this kind of a choice, whereas majority of the people not being able to access it on the first place. I think that policy itself then becomes extremely flawed. This was the second call out from side opposition. But then there are two important things that happened in this debate and two important metrics to judge this debate. First, they go ahead and say that, oh, US and all of these other countries have a certain degree of better livelihood, so we are able to provide them with that. Note it is inexclusive. The way Chahat dealt with this in her whip speech is she told you that because of UN convention, climate refugees are still being taken up by a lot of countries, most of European countries in status quo. What is not happening in status quo is that major polluter still don't take them. They had to prove to me why exclusively when major polluters start taking climate refugee, that becomes a delta of like change in their side of the house. We believe insofar these refugees still have other option. I am unsure why they would want to like push them to like India, China, where conditions are way worse than most European countries. That is the idea, right? They have to prove you the exclusivity of just major polluter countries taking it. Then they go ahead and say that, oh, there's a principal obligation that these countries have to take them in the very first place. Problem with this principal obligation. At a point of time, you just take these climate refugees and do nothing else to rebuild what you have damaged. This means that India, China have caused enough pollution and they now need to fix it. They now need to give reparations, but they don't do any fixing. They just give like a temporary getaway to the problem by taking in refugees. So the crux of the problem never gets solved. But lastly, their idea is their examples just revolve in extremes. They go ahead and give you examples of like, oh, sea level rising and literally a country getting washed off. Problem with this example is that climate refugees exist on a spectrum. There are some refugees that literally make those shifts based on like increasing AQI, cyclones, floods, all of these things. When extreme cases happen, then reallocation is literally happening in status quo, right? Because of UN convention. The debate then becomes about the spectrum of like climate refugee on the very first place. We believe that on a spectrum, you don't have enough capacity to take this. But lastly, note what is the problem with not solving climate change and status quo. Climate will still continue to deteriorate. State rebuild, if you don't put in money in state rebuilding, there is going to be more like air quality damage, there's going to be more cyclones, all of these things. Insofar that keeps happening in long term, not only that the countries or refugees that are suffering in status quo will suffer further, but even like the countries who took them as refugee are likely going to suffer because climate change is all pervasive. From like a smaller country, it's going to transfer to bigger countries in terms of like sea level being concerned, right? Lastly, two metrics on which we win this debate. Firstly, we tell you that better livelihood is attained better onto our side of the house because you rebuild their own states from where they come. You reallocate them better in their own state instead of just giving them food and shelter, literally no job, healthcare, and access to any other facility, which is bad for these vulnerable people. Secondly, on climate change, which is the theme of this entire debate, right? We tell you insofar you rebuild your structures that have been damaged by these polluting countries. You start from scratch. You give them a better avenue to solve what has been like done wrong. For all these reasons, proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the entire debate, I call upon the reply from government.
Okay, wait a second. Excellent.
restarting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Both sides have agreed that there is a problem and there's a climate crisis that is deteriorating. So what essentially this debate about? This debate is essentially about whether or not which one is better, opening borders or keeping status quo, meaning that aiding the climate refuge aiding these countries of climate refugees for state rebuilding. So understand that what essentially have been we believe that side of opposition they wouldn't solve this problem much more effectively, because as stated by my speaker under here, they have been looking through this debate under one side only. They have not realized that there are other stakeholders into this debate also, such as the United States, etc., etc. They kept going on about like how India China is worse. Their situations are much worse than this climate refugees countries. But understand today here is that what we have already been clarifying all around 3CB is that understand that these by opening our borders, meaning that it will hold the kind this major polluter nations hold accountable, meaning that they need to provide for these people so that they could realize that they are doing something wrong, which is polluting to these other countries. Understand that these we have already told to you, and we already answers all of your questions. But understand today here is that what we could see from what side of opposition is trying to do. Side of opposition is trying to just ignore the fact that ignore the fact that there is a problem, which means that we already questioned to you how are you going to ensure that these aid are going to be given to these for this state rebuilding when instead it already stated it is already the status quo. And just to extend of it, there's 1.3 million Jordan refugees are currently waiting for this aid that never came from the United States. So we could already see how actually that re- aiding this aiding for state rebuilding isn't the most efficient way, as it's just full of empty promises. Now, moving on. Moving on, we have already told to you that by opening borders, it could have a better opportunities, short term, long term, for the livelihood of these climate refugees. We think that this is a better solution rather than of what side of opposition is trying to do. Another thing is that has been said is that we believe that under our side we solve this problem better, as we not only solve it for the short term but also the long term. But what side of opposition is trying to do? Side opposition is trying to look too far into the future when they do not realize that there is an impending problem that need to be solved quite fast. Understand today here is that okay, yes, we have already said to you multiple times, yes, aiding into this problem will be good in the long term, but understand that what is the climate refugees going to do in that moment of time. Understand that aiding for state rebuilding the state rebuilding is not providing enough for these climate refugees. So what have I been saying for the past few minutes? I've already proven to you like how the how side of governments solve this problem better and much more effectively, and I've already told to you how if I switch that the question of resources in today's debate. So with all of that being said, I rest my speech. Thank you.
Thank you for the space. That's all for the debate. Me and so Dennis will go to judge room. So you guys please stay here and waiting for the OA. Thank you.